Okay, it's a little after 5:30 and we are live streaming to the city's YouTube channel. I just want to say, thank you for joining us for our Community Advisory Committee meeting number 5 for the West Relook project. I think we all, kind of know each other virtually now, and we have a lot of things on the agenda tonight. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Joe Dills from Angelo Planning Group to get us started.
Thanks, Erica. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Let's take care of a couple of things first. If you could pull up the presentation, please, Kira. And we had a meeting summary from your last meeting that was in the packet. Were there any comments anybody wanted to make or changes to those? This is just a check-in. We really don't do formal adoption.
Yeah, I did want to make, and I think I lost, oh, there's the meeting. Hello, sorry.
Yeah. Hi, Jean.
Hello. So for clarification, the last item on number 4 designates me as chair. I'm not the chair of this group, just commissioner. So if that could be corrected.
We will correct that.
And then I thought for clarification, I suggested providing links with information for other reference materials like HB 2001. That I didn't need links for this meeting. I needed links for the other source document that's citizens reading may need information about to have a better informed understanding of why we're doing what we're doing here. And then I thought it might be appropriate in the number 3 section where Tim Rosner and Doug Scott are referenced, if they were addressed as counselors, because it gives context to their input about what council was doing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Those are my only comments. Thank you.
Yeah, those are all clarifications. So
yes, not changing context. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
All right. Not seeing anybody else here for changes, so let's keep rolling. A little check-in on where we are in our process. We're at meeting 5, and this is 5 out of 9 because we have added a meeting for December. We had set up the work plan so that we would create assumptions for the scenarios and also draft scenarios maps and bring all of that together in one meeting. We thought it would be better for you, and it was a little better at our end, frankly, to just bring the assumptions for discussion. And then we will return with draft scenario maps in December. So that's the 2 meeting sequence. And where that is in the bigger picture is the scenario work is our alternatives that we'll be looking at. And so you can think of it as a 3-step discussion process of alternatives. Tonight's assumptions, December will be draft maps, and then we'll do our evaluation and be back in late January, early February to share those with everybody. So that's where we are in the process. I'm going to keep rolling, and we'll go to the public comment. So back to you, Erica, please.
Great. So I sent out all the public comments received to date to the committee this morning. As public comments, the turnaround period was 24 hours in advance of the meeting. So we do have quite a bit of public comment this evening. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read kind of the first 3 minutes of each testimony into the record. I know that all of you have it, or if you haven't read it yet, you can go back to your emails and read them later on. So with that, I have my timer and I'm just going to get going here. So the first one is from Bill Galloway. And regarding public comments, number 1, in reading through the comments, it is obvious many residents do not understand or don't care that state law requires a review of the UGB on a regular basis, perhaps an article in the local paper describing the process and the intended results. This article could include statistics as to how many residents actually hold jobs within the city. Number 2, the evaluation criteria state that neighborhood retail nodes provide residents with walkable access to goods and services. Given the most recent map shows commercial development at the far north and south points of Sherwood West, this is not walkable. One concept is a mixed commercial residential development similar to Orinco or Villebois. The committee should review the success and or lack of success in these 2 areas to determine if this is viable for Sherwood. Number 3, if this plan is implemented, Edie Road becomes the central east-west traffic conduit. Edie is nowhere near capable of handling the loads development will add. It is currently a huge bottleneck on school days. Edie should get the same upgrade as envisioned for Elwert, similar to Sunset. This includes sidewalk, bike paths, turn lanes at all intersections. A roundabout at Copper Terrace should be considered given the plan shows that road extending across Edie into a large development. Thanks, Bill Galloway. The next one is from John Vandenberg. In evaluating the open house feedback, please consider by a margin of 4.73 to 1, respondents to council members Rosner's Facebook poll disagreed that Sherwood West would have a positive effect on our community. The open house survey avoided any such question and instead posed questions presuming that this westward sprawl is both inevitable and desirable, avoiding any mention of possible downsides. 3, the city did not mention the open house survey in the Archer or Sherwood Gazette or otherwise publicize it widely to the general public. 4, probably many respondents to the survey work for the city or are developers or otherwise have a financial interest in the expansion. 5, yet nearly half of the respondents went beyond the specific questions asked to oppose the expansion in whole or in part. Thank you for your service, John Vandenberg. The next one is also from John Vandenberg. We live on Baker Road in Sherwood West. We live on Baker Road in the Sherwood School District. Watching the hour-long city council work session on August 27th regarding Sherwood West was troubling. From the comments of both council members and staff, it is clear that the speakers believe the following. Expansion of Sherwood is inevitable. All speakers assumed that expansion of Sherwood was a given. The mayor commented that Sherwood won't stop there and that Sherwood West expansion was just the beginning. Expansion of Sherwood is desirable. All speakers assumed the expansion of Sherwood is desirable. With one exception, there was no mention of any possible downside to expansion. The lone exception was a council member mentioning that his Facebook poll results showed Sherwood residents concerned about added traffic caused by expanding into Sherwood West, but neither he nor anyone else commented on that concern. No effort needs to be made to avoid expanding Sherwood. No one suggested making any effort to avoid expanding Sherwood's encroachment on nature. Mention was made of a metro requirement that a city requesting a mid-cycle expansion of the UGB have taken certain steps to satisfy housing needs within its current boundaries. When it was noted that Sherwood had not taken these steps, the discussion moved on, with no one suggesting that Sherwood would earnestly take steps to satisfy future housing needs within its current footprint. Climate change, wildlife, loss of habitat is not relevant. No one mentioned climate change, wildlife, loss of habitat. The closest anyone came in the hour-long discussion to discussing the environment was a repeated comment that the trees along Sunset are beautiful to see. No one said anything to suggest that turning pastures, trees, or open space into roads, parking lots, buildings, requiring air conditioning, et cetera, would cause the slightest harm to anything of value. Metro's criteria for expansion are a mere obstacle to be overcome. Several Metro criteria for seeking an expansion of the UGB were mentioned. No one endorsed those criteria or said anything to suggest that Sherwood shared the concern behind those criteria. On the contrary, a staff representative said she could make some arguments there, and in effect that she could manage to write up something to comply with some of those criteria. We write to ask that someone on the CAC speak up at the September 8th, 2001 meeting, and thereafter to urge the committee and the city to take steps back to face the climate change loss of pollinators, drought, et cetera, rethink its priorities and table any and all talk of expansion and instead focus on planning inside the city's current footprint. At the very least, please insist that all Sherwood West proposals include now without delaying until momentum toward expansion cannot be stopped. A sincere assessment, not lip service. of trees lost, impact of pollinators, increased traffic emissions, light pollution, noise pollution, GHG emissions, increased energy usage for air conditioning, etc. Oh, hold on. And there is one more sentence, but we're just going to move on to the next. Let's see here.
If there's just one more sentence, just finish it.
Okay. Before dismissing our concerns, please ask yourself how widely shared in Sherwood community there are likely are, and consider the results of the Facebook poll mentioned below. Sincerely, John Vandenberg. All right, this one comes from Lynn Berry. This statement is intended for citizen public comment regarding the November 3rd meeting for Sherwood West development. I learned of this proposed development from the Sherwood West area from a neighbor on the Nextdoor app, and my research on this matter is ongoing. My family and I oppose the development due to increased traffic concerns, pollution, destruction of land, farms, and natural habitats. The vast majority of Sherwood citizens oppose this development and resist developing into a city similar to Beaverton, Hillsborough, and other rural towns that have been enveloped with development that has brought crime, pollution, homelessness, and lack of resources. Sherwood is a lasting gem of a beautiful, desirable, safe, and family-oriented city. The continued loss of open space and rural components will ruin Sherwood. If the majority of Sherwood citizens oppose this development, how are these plans still going forward? The few who will make millions on this project are ignoring and taking advantage of Sherwood citizens' wishes and rights to their city. Please, my family, neighbors, friends, and I are demanding to cease this catastrophic development. Lynn Berry. Okay, the next one comes from Mary Ann Fickett. Dear Erica Palmer, Planning Manager for the City of Sherwood, Sherwood Mayor, and the Sherwood City Council. My husband and I moved to Sherwood over a year ago because of the fact it is a small community in the rural areas surrounding it offer a charm and relief from urban sprawl. It is sad to see up the street and neighboring communities, huge developments taking over farmland and vital habitats. When we first heard of Sherwood West plan, we were greatly distraught. It feels like the plan is being railroaded without careful thought as to how this will impact the quality of life here. Also, we are greatly concerned about how this plan will affect the Tualatin River Wildlife Refuge and the Title 13 areas designated sensitive habitat upland environments that are clearly marked in the Sherwood West development plan. As we've noted before, there are many businesses and industrial buildings sitting empty in Sherwood right now. To say you need this development for light industry is ludicrous. And the fact that you want single multiple family homes in this area make the potential for urban sprawl, crowded neighborhoods, lack of parking, the need for building more and improving current roads important issues. The traffic already along Edie and Elwert has become heavy just in the year that we've lived here. We can't imagine what it would be like if this development goes through as planned. The mindset that to be successful, communities need to grow is outdated. It's time to rethink what we value and use our inventive minds to create other opportunities for financial well-being within the jewel of a town we already have. We have friends who were up here last spring looking for a small farm to buy. We checked into the 2 farms on Edie Road next to the Oregon Trail neighborhood, and we were shocked to hear they've already been claimed by developers. I'm very curious how that can be since this plan has not been approved. Here was a real situation where a young couple who have a great deal of knowledge about land management and agriculture who could have been an asset to the community of Sherwood. They wanted to contribute to farmers markets and have a fruit and vegetable stand to even give food away. We desperately need small family farms. We also need to share this land with our fellow creatures whose homes are on the so-called vacant land. Has anyone thought about how they might feel? Where do they go when the bulldozers arrive? Obviously, I'm very passionate about this matter. We've seen communities flatten and destroy habitats, cut down old growth trees, and force wildlife to flee and lose valuable family farms all in the name of progress. Has anyone been paying attention? We're at a pivotal moment here. We can just stop this madness and choose a wiser approach. We don't have to copy other communities just because they are destroying valuable open space. And it is Mary Ann Bickett. We just have a few more. This one comes from Sarah Larson. Hello, I just found out about the Sherwood West project and looked over the details. I live in the Mandel Farms neighborhood on the corner of Edie and Elwert and have some concerns about the street framework option number 2. It looks like it would make Elwert a main artery and Elwert would be significantly rebuilt. Elwert is already too busy with over 9,000 cars per day. I can't imagine what 14,000 cars per day would look like. I saw a Facebook post about this topic and many of my neighbors are concerned about what this would do to our sweet little community. Most of us moved to Sherwood to escape the hustle and bustle of larger towns, so this is very concerning. We purchased our homes because it is directly across from 2 farms, but it looks like those may be replaced with large housing developments. Elwert is already too dangerous enough as it is for our children. It looks like I am too late to make official comments, but how can my voice be heard? Thank you, Sarah Larson. This one comes from Stephen Marriott. Dear sirs, I'm not in favor of the provisions of the Sherwood West Development Plan. Before any more land should be incorporated into the Sherwood city limits, the adjacent infrastructure needs to be updated. Neither Edie nor Elwert are wide enough to handle the current traffic load, let alone the increased traffic the Sherwood West Development Plan will cause. Sherwood does not need to grow because some developer wants to get rich by raping the land and stuffing multifamily dwelling units so close together that emergency services like fire trucks can barely fit the resulting narrow roads. The Sherwood West Development Plan is flawed in many ways and appears to have been written by the developer. I am really against this plan. Stephen Marriott. And the last one this evening is from Xander Brown. To the committee, as a resident of Sherwood who lives west of 99 and who would actually be impacted by this development, I believe Sherwood West is an underdeveloped and unsupported idea, and we all should take this opportunity to end development and refocus on our current city and growth within the current boundaries. It appears as if the planning committee doesn't know about the wishes of the town's residents, as in every single poll taken, the vast majority of the open house commentary and every person I have talked to is against this development. It's possible you haven't heard the outcry from the opposition that is due to the fact that most residents have no idea a River Terrace 2.0 is planned in their city. It seems unreasonable that against unanimous opposition, this council continues to push this plan. I understand that money is involved for those developers who provided the first public comment and continue to try to sway people in their local newspaper or local paper. They have a vested interest in this happening, but there are so many better options than Sherwood West. The only people that seem to approve of this plan are the ones who stand to make a great deal of money, or those of you who have spent a great deal of time planning it and continue to perpetuate the sunk cost of fallacy. Sherwood is designed a small town bedroom community. Yes, we understand businesses provide the most tax dollars for you, but residents of small towns and bedroom communities move to places like Sherwood to avoid precisely what you propose in Sherwood West. If you want this town to be tired, which is what Sherwood West is emulating, you lose what makes Sherwood, well, Sherwood. We heard from you on the 27th that people want to move to Sherwood. They do. And I did, because it wasn't like Tyre or Beaverton. They won't move here when plans like this make it similar to those cities. You'll get more vacancies and lose the soul of the neighborhood. 90% of respondents on the open house and the vast majority who answered the poll hosted by Councillor Rosner were opposed to the entire development. Their demands are simple: invest in parts of town that are widely available, add more multifamily housing to existing locations so that we increase livability in the town, work on expanding current roads and building better natural areas. Why do we have to grow? The only people who seem to want to expand are the developers. Traffic is already abysmal and major thoroughfares, and none of the solutions provided will solve it. The idea of moving Elwert out at an angle would be fine if that lessened traffic, but it won't. The addition of new businesses on the side of 99 will even make it busier and drive more truck through traffic down Elwert. The letter read in the last meeting about housing diversity should be considered. By annexing a new area in order to meet the lower income housing requirements, you are simply segregating the group off in Sherwood West. You seem to proclaim that we need mixed employment buildings, but the businesses in Sherwood proper are already struggling. And that comes from Xander Brown. And that is the end of public comments received. Whew.
Okay.
So I know we don't generally respond to public comment directly, and I won't on a specific level, but I do think it's worth maybe mentioning what the purpose of this committee is and what the purpose of this committee isn't, just from a clarity perspective. Would that be appropriate?
Yes, please go ahead, Doug.
Yeah. So, and I think this is just for everyone who might be watching. Just to clarify, this committee is not assembled to decide whether we move forward with Sherwood West now or in the future or never or not at all. That's not why this committee exists. That's a decision that will be made at a later date by council and other Metro and other entities. And so this committee exists solely for the purpose of updating the concept plan for Sherwood West, which is already in existence. So there's already a plan that is already on the books on how this area will develop if and when it is ever developed. The whole reason this committee exists is because the city looked at that plan and says it's outdated and we need to update it. So if this committee disbands and we do nothing, there's already a Sherwood West concept plan that's been adopted. So the whole reason this committee is here is to say, you know what, we need to look at it, we need to change it because things have changed, we need to update it, and then we have a new plan. And then at some point in the future, city council and others will decide if we want to pursue it, when we want to pursue it, how we want to pursue it, whether that's 3 years from now or 20 years from now or never. So I think people need to really understand why we're here and why we're not here. So I just want to make that clear. But I also want to make clear that there's already existing concept plan. It already exists. So our goal here is to make it better. And the debate about whether we should do it or not do it or when is a conversation for a different body and a different day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doug. And we have the online survey results. So if the others are interested in kind of further discussion, I think there's a tie-in there as well. So I'm gonna keep us moving. The next one is a update on the trails plan. So Kira, I'm gonna toss it over to you and show the update.
All right, thanks, Joe. So at our last meeting, we were reminded about the presence of a natural gas transmission pipeline that runs through the Sherwood West area. And so we took a closer look at the alignment of this pipeline, and it's a little bit hard to see on this map, so I apologize. But it comes down from this utility easement here that runs along Chicken Creek, south, almost parallel to the western edge of Sherwood High School. It juts into that property a bit here, down to Kruger Road, and then down where my cursor is here, down to Chapman. So we took a closer look at this pipeline alignment in the context of our trails map that we had shown you in our previous plan concepts. And we made just a couple adjustments to this map. The first of those adjustments is to extend the trail that comes out of Chicken Creek here down along the western edge of the Sherwood High School property, following that gas pipeline easement down to where it would meet the trail on Kruger Road. And then the second adjustment is to extend, or it's really shifting the trail that we had previously shown on this future road, which I'm highlighting with my cursor here. We shifted it over to the east to kind of follow the pipeline alignment. And we've got about a 60-foot right of way approximately, or easement width, that's going to be open space, can't be developed. So we're making these changes to take advantage of that existing open space and route the trail along here, which will give us kind of a more friendlier trail going north-south here than locating it just on the side of the road.
And I'll
This
just
is Jim
add,
Rose from the school district. Can I ask a quick question?
yeah, please.
On that first adjustment, that easement actually cuts through kind of about a third of the property for about half the north-south line on that west side. Is the trail intended to just go basically along our west property line and catch the easement towards the
Yes.
south end?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And you're right. It kind of goes along Haiti Road here for a bit, then jets down pretty close to the high school building.
Yeah.
And then comes back over to this. This is kind of up the private school road here.
Yeah. That along that private road makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Two quick things to add is the team is following up with Northwest Natural to get their feedback on what public access easements would look like and what's required to get them, so that a trail following the gas line easement would work. And then whatever other guidance they might have on planning standards like setbacks and so on.
We were
Any other-
limited to moving no more than 6 inches of dirt above the pipeline.
Okay. Huh, good to know. Any comments or questions about these trail adjustments in the easement? I think it follows on the sentiment that we were being advised of before. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep us rolling. So the next agenda item is the summary of the online open house. So more about community feedback. So Kira, you're still on.
Thanks. Yeah, lots of community input coming in, but that's good because that's a sign that people are learning about this project and paying attention. And I have to say, in Sherwood, you guys are close readers and a very involved community. So that's great. Starting pretty high level with we asked some questions about our vision, goals, and evaluation criteria, which you as a committee approved at a previous meeting. We saw about half of the people were either somewhat or strongly supportive of the vision, goals, and evaluation criteria. And those are the colors shown here in dark and light green. And then, about 12% and 17% respectively for vision, goals, and evaluation criteria. Kind of felt neutral about it. And then the rest of the people were less supportive. And I think we can talk more about that later. And if you read the comments, you'll have a little bit of context. And I think a lot of that has to do with making sure that we're educating people on why we need Sherwood West. And as Councillor Scott was saying before, there is already a plan in place. So we need to do some more education on the project to kind of help people better understand the reasons for this. And then we asked questions about each of the plan concepts, and there were 6. So it was a lot of information, and we understand that. I'm just going to touch on a couple of the sort of highlights that I picked out from each of these 6 topic areas. For mixed employment, we heard some concerns just sort of generally about including industrial and office uses in Sherwood West, and especially about the impacts that those will have on traffic. But on the other hand, we heard some people who were really excited about the idea of Sherwood as this sort of gateway to wine country and opportunities to bring in some wine-related uses and maybe even some flex space and healthcare into this side of Sherwood. In our neighborhoods plan concept, there was support for connecting green spaces into a network and sort of integrating the nature into neighborhoods. And there was some concerns about higher density housing types in general. We heard a lot of people say they support single family, but not as much apartments or quadplexes, triplexes, that sort of thing.
Were you able to quantify that?
So specifically for the types of housing, we provided a ranking style question. So we asked people to rank the housing types in order of which ones they thought would be most important for Sherwood West to least important. So the actual raw data that comes out in the Excel spreadsheet is kind of confusing looking, which is why in the summary I showed it in the list there, but I can provide you with the raw data if that's something that you'd like to look over.
Yeah, I'd like
It's a lot of
to-
spreadsheets, but happy
Yeah,
to send them.
I'd like to see that. Thank you.
Sure. Chicken Creek Greenway, I would say people were generally supportive. They liked the idea of preserving this creek corridor and enhancing the habitat and providing trails and some kind of connections to other regional parks in Sherwood. Livable and connected streets. We got some more support for option 1, which is the realignment of Edie Elwert. Most people were supportive of that as the kind of street option that we should be moving forward with in this plan. So that was a good confirmation of what we've already been hearing. And of course, we've got some concerns about traffic and about the way that the currently sort of rural streets will perform with new development. And for the Elwert Road design concept, people liked the example that we provided of Sunset as a corridor with sort of a green landscaped street corridor with buffered sidewalks, and making sure that that street connects into the rest of Sherwood and provides those bike ped connections to the rest of Sherwood. And for active transportation, generally people were supportive of multimodal connections, bike and ped connections to these destinations here. Some concerns about transit and bike share and e-scooters. And people were excited about the idea to get more regional bicycle and pedestrian connections to and from Sherwood. So I'm going to stop there. Anything you want to add, Joe or Erica?
None from me. How about you, Erica?
None from me.
Comments, questions, thoughts from around the committee? Doug, back to you.
I do have one comment.
Go ahead, Erica.
Now that I think about it.
Go ahead.
After, reading through these comments and getting a good summary of how people are feeling and what they know about this project, we are putting together a long form article about Sherwood West in the next Archer. And this is actually really good timing because the next Archer is coming out the next couple of weeks.
Okay. All right. So back to committee discussion. Doug, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I this really comment is not just about active transportation, but if you looked at the various comments and feedback we got throughout all the parks, trails, documentation, green spaces, it was just the theme that ran throughout it to me was not just having green spaces and access to nature and all those things, but having them be interconnected throughout Sherwood West. And I just think that that is just critical, that we have to make sure that as not just as we get together the plan, we have to make sure the plan has the teeth in it to ensure that as the different parcels come in for development over a long period of time, that the connectedness of those trails and green spaces is enforced throughout the process. And I know we've seen some things happen in the past where we had ideas for that similar type of, maybe not on the scale, but similar type of interconnected trails and parks. And then as individual developers have come in at different points in time through the planning process, they haven't necessarily followed that plan as well as the concept plan would have envisioned. And I want to make sure that we do everything we can to ensure that we have a lot of force behind that connectedness, because that would be it'd be a real shame if you weren't able to walk a trail from one end of Sherwood West to the other, continuously, because I think we have a beautiful opportunity here to really make that happen. I want to make sure we really enforce that strongly. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing a couple thumbs up there. Anybody else comments on what you saw in the online survey results?
I have just a brief comment. I really need to see the raw data. It's hard to interpret the feeling of what people want just from kind of comments, and I hate to say this, that are cherry picked out of there, or summarized. So it's hard for me to even evaluate it at this point.
Okay.
And Councilor Rosner, I included all of the long form responses, literally copied and pasted as is in the document. So while these are my summaries, you have those, and I can send the kind of quantitative
That would be
data
great.
to
That'd
you
be
in a
awesome.
spreadsheet.
And I'm not complaining. It's just I'd like to see that data. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you'll find that Tim and I will ask for the full quantitative data every time on every survey ever done in the city on any subject, because that's how we feel about it. We're data people.
Duly noted. I get that.
Okay. All right. If there isn't any further comment, then we'll keep rolling with the agenda.
Can I ask one more question just real quick?
Yeah.
I apologize if I missed this. The slide before where it talks about the Elwert realignment options, that was for realignment of the current road. If I understand right, we didn't discuss in the surveys the potential of creating a new alignment to offload traffic off Elwert south of Sherwood West. That wasn't something that was contemplated in the survey. Is that correct?
Correct. It was the 2 street options in reference to the crossing of Chicken Creek. One that sort of swoops over the creek and the other is the current alignment.
Yeah, because I think that's important context for the public to understand, especially as we're talking about kind of the traffic challenges around any potential development out there, that they're realigning is one option. You know, ED is definitely a problem, as one of the people commented, you know, in the public comments. But there are a lot of ways we can solve that. And I don't know how we get the word out on that. Erica, maybe you could mention that in the article, that's something we're working with Washington County on. But solving for traffic is an important issue.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so moving ahead to the next item is really the first of 2 that are background and assumptions related for preparing scenarios. So Erica, go ahead and take this one.
Great, thanks, Joe. So in your packet, there was a quick overview of the city's housing needs analysis. And this analysis really helped to inform the city's housing goals and policies in the updated comprehensive plan. But it can also help inform how neighborhoods will look in Sherwood West. Next slide there, great. So a little background here. As we all know, the region is growing, and as such, the population in Sherwood continues to grow. The population now in 2021, we are now just a little bit over the 20,000 threshold. So we started to plan for Sherwood West in 2015 because it was recognized that if the community doesn't add more land for new housing, people will still continue to move here, but housing prices will rise and our community will experience more pressure for infill development at higher densities. The housing needs analysis shows us that the city is short just over 600 units for the next planning period, which is a 20-year period. So we have heard from the community that infill development and high density housing doesn't always necessarily align with Sherwood's character, but creating a long range vision for housing in Sherwood West allows the city to plan better and to align housing with our goals and policies. So the 20-year forecast is showing that Sherwood will add roughly 1,729 units. And now remember, this is just a forecast. The Metropolitan Housing Rule, which is a state requirement of Oregon, it requires that cities need to provide the opportunity for at least 50% of new residential units to be single family detached and 50% multifamily. The city's adopted housing needs analysis, we have assumed that the forecast of new housing will be 50% single family detached, 25% single family attached, and 25% multifamily. Next slide. So how does this translate into housing types for Sherwood West? So we are looking at single family detached housing with the average 7 units per net acre with an average lot size of 6,200 square feet. We're looking at single dwelling attached housing with an average of 20 units per net acre and the average lot size of 2,200 square feet. And that provides for a typical large townhome development. And then for multi-family dwellings, we are looking at an average of 20 units per net acre. Next slide. Okay. So in looking at our residential place types in Sherwood West, or kind of the areas on the map that relate to housing, we have 3 place types. We have low density residential, medium density residential, and high density residential. And the overall net densities are really made up of our, they're based on our comprehensive plan designations currently, what we're seeing on average. On the right side of that table there is showing the housing, the assumed housing mix in each of these place types. So in our low density residential area or place types, the overall net density is 8 units per net acre. And then we are seeing a housing mix of 95% single dwelling detached, 5% single dwelling attached. Jean, I'm going to get to your question right after this, or should you ask your question now?
Let's go with the question now. Go ahead,
Okay.
Jean.
So my question is, these are assumed numbers or
Yes,
history that we've been-
these are assumptions.
do we have anything that references what our recent development trend has been? Because all of these exceed what we've been developing at historically. So rather than becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of high density residential, can we not look at what we've done in the past? Or at least have that information available?
Erica, I'll give my answers. The answer is yes. And
Yes.
it's actually a good reason to be talking about this over 2 meetings that we can bring.
Right, and because there's 2 problems. One is that we're not looking at what we've done historically, and then 2 is everything without HB 2001 throws all of these numbers out the window. So we're destined for a lot of challenges when we're trying to do any planning with this untested mandate from the state. So, thank you.
And Jean, just to follow up with your second comment about HB 2001, I think we're going to get to that. And then when we talk about the scenario planning.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. Thank you.
Tim, let's go to your comment or question.
Oh, you just got to my point. I think it's really important that people listening to this understand the impacts of House Bill 2001 and this committee as well, because it takes a lot of our ability as a city to plan for growth away. So that's an important conversation.
Okay.
Everybody should understand those 8 units per acre on low density residential instantly become 32 units per acre when quads are put in there. I mean, that's scary.
And just to be clear, that's Salem telling us what developers can do on those properties.
Okay. Erica, did you finish all your presentation for this slide?
Yeah, let me just go over medium density residential. So the housing mix, we're like,
Sure.
These are assumptions. Single dwelling detached, 52%, single dwelling attached, 48%. And then the high density residential is, we're looking at 24 units per net acre with single dwelling attached, 56%, and multifamily, 44%.
Where do things like some of the middle housing options and cottage clusters and stuff like that fit into here. I mean, they don't seem to be fit into either attached or detached. So how would that be categorized?
So plexes, depending, cottage clusters, depending on what they look like, they could either fall as detached or attached, but definitely plexes are attached housing.
Yeah, clearly.
Townhomes are attached housing. And then for multifamily in our code, anything over, 5 attached units is considered multifamily.
Are these 3 categories, do they mean anything from a code level, or is it just a way to like summarize information? Like,
So right now we have these general plan categories actually in our comp plan and in our, general comp plan map / zoning map for the city. So, it's a way for us to really describe what low density residential looks like, medium density residential, and high density residential. The only one that it is excluded from this table that's in our current development code is that very low density residential zone that's in Southeast Sherwood. And that's primarily because we're probably not going to see that special zone in Sherwood West.
I think better clarification is that detached, attached, and multi-dwelling is what the state requires for us to have. We have to allow opportunity for 50%. And so when we push our numbers together for 50% of our opportunity units have to be detached and multi-dwelling, we need to count correctly and not assume that we're going to, I don't know. I think the numbers.
Yeah, so those are essentially, it's weird because it feels like that part of the state code requirement is somewhat outdated in comparison to the new housing types that have to be allowed. And so it's kind of, to me, those 3 categories are a roll up of really 10 or 12 actual housing types that get built and developed or will be getting built and developed, starting after next year. So I'm just curious who controls that roll up, whether that's something we do or the state does, or if it's official or unofficial or what. But
so are we saying that we have 100% opportunity for detached because we now are required to allow duplexes, triplexes, and quads in all single family designated zoning? You could almost say that now.
It's a good point.
yeah, I think this is technical stuff that can be handled offline, but to me, this raises a lot more questions than answers. So I'm just looking for clarity on.
One thing that I'll add to this is that it does give us just a basis to do the calculations so that we can count or estimate numbers of units similar to the 3 types of housing, as Jean said, that the city has analyzed to date in its housing needs analysis, et cetera. That's one thing it does. Secondly, just it gives us a practical way to create the colors on the map, so to speak, without having to go into a lot of detail about many different categories of plexes and cottage clusters and so on, to do more generalized concept planning.
Yeah, but I think when we get to the coloring of the map, I'm going to want to ensure that we don't overcolor high density and medium density residential and create a self-fulfilling prophecy of overbuilding, because the amount of acreage needed for a high density residential to meet 24 units versus very small in comparison to what we need acreage wise. And so I want to make sure we use the numbers, and if we can meet our state required goals by applying, as Councillor Scott was inferring, that these HB 2001 meet single family attached goals, then we may be able to look at our Sherwood West zoning in a more favorable light.
Okay, so hold that thought, because we're going to actually have a similar conversation here in a few slides.
Okay.
I so let's move on to the next slide here, and I'm going to pick up the presentation. So why look at these numbers and these assumptions? Because in our process, we're doing scenario planning. Scenarios are another term for alternatives. So when you think about our next step in the planning process, think about scenarios plural, so that we can look across different choices and learn some different things by different arrangements of estimated growth and development in various forms on the land. So let's go to the next slide. And in fact, you've already been doing alternatives and scenario planning. We happen to have a scenario model that these numbers all plug into. But you did it previously for the Sherwood West preliminary concept plan without the same model, but you were essentially doing the same process. So the three categories that we were just talking about of multi-dwellings or multifamily, that's essentially the orange areas that were looked at before. The single family attached is represented here as the medium color yellow, but it was of course envisioned as being the residential that would be mostly detached housing. So that's one of the things that's changed on us, is the provision for HB 2001. And then finally, the third level of single family detached was represented as hillside residential before. So a different set of assumptions, but you were looking at alternatives in conceptual small number of residential categories on these maps previously. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. There are a host of things that are brought together in the scenarios, ranging from the preliminary concept plan, the middle housing requirements at the state level, of course, what we hear from the community, your recently updated or about to be adopted updated comprehensive plan, the plan concepts that we've been talking about, like the Chicken Creek Greenway and so on, and interconnected trails, buildable lands, and the background market work we've done. The scenarios give us a way to organize all of that onto some maps and look at some choices for how Sherwood West might develop in the future. So let's go to the next slide, please. A bit about our land supply. If you just measure the gross acreage of Sherwood West, it's 1,231 acres. But of course, it's comprised of many unbuildable areas or committed areas, such as the green spaces, the power line corridors, existing homes that would remain. There's some rural development in portions of it, the high school itself. And so the gross number, of course, quickly whittles down to a smaller net buildable, which is what the 591 acres is. Just a footnote on that, that number does not include our estimate of land for street right-of-way. So you can think of it as kind of net buildable land. We've had a discussion to date about the mixed employment areas, the importance of providing employment opportunities within Sherwood West. We'll get to another display of that in a moment. But from a land supply basis, we've estimated that there's 198 acres of the net buildable industrial or mixed employment type land. And so if you do that subtraction, our residential land supply is going to be somewhere around 350 acres. So those are the estimates on amount of land that we're working with for households and for employment uses. Let's go to the next slide. And here's where we get to a discussion question. We want to check in here about whether we should, quote, hold or keep constant the amount of the purple areas shown on this map. And I would give that a plus or minus a little tweak here and there if we discover something. But fundamentally, is it your desire to have these employment areas to be similar on each of the three alternatives that we're going to prepare? Reason for the question is we don't want to presume too much. We did hear that there's a high priority on these types of lands, and we've developed a pretty strong rationale for areas 1, 2, 3, and 4. The community response being introduced to this concept was a little more mixed in the online survey, as you saw. So I wanted to just pause here as a first level discussion and get some feedback from the committee. Should we have similar employment areas on all three alternatives? Doug, let's start with you.
I have thoughts, but I'm going to hold those because I want to hear from other members of the committee first. But I did want to clarify one thing. Does the 190 do the four things on here represent the 198 tellable net buildable?
Yes, and
Okay.
think of the net buildable as a subset of what's colored, because of course we got committed land.
But that's where you get the 198. If we hold these four things, that's the 198 net buildable. Okay.
Exactly.
And then the only other clarification I would add, and I'll hold the rest of my comments for later, is I felt there was a pretty strong desire to remove 2 in our last meeting. Maybe I remember that wrong, but I thought we had a pretty strong consensus among this group that we didn't really like 2. And I certainly feel like we heard that from the community as well, but I'll let others weigh in on that and I'll come back later.
Okay. All right. Let's maybe go to someone who hasn't spoken yet. Committee members that, Rodney, please.
Sorry, I missed the last meeting, but I like the idea of 2 because I think we do need something that is walkable as a commercial spot for the group in the current west and the new west. So it's my thoughts on the item number 2. I do like item number 1 and 3 and 4 as well, having them on the outside of the cities with a smaller area in the middle.
Okay, thank you. Brian Dorsey.
Yes, I also want to echo what Rodney spoke of in regards to the plot of land, item number 2. Walkability has been mentioned to me numerous times from different ones in the community, and to take that away really takes away what we really want to look forward to doing in that area in terms of making it truly similar to what we have currently on the other side of 99, where they can walk to shops, walk to maybe a healthcare provider, a dentist, hair salon, and keep some things over on that side of the community in which they don't have to get in their car or worry about their kids maybe having to traverse 99 to get into an area where they can shop or buy some candy. So I think number 2 is pivotal, only because I know it'll provide a different type of economic boom for that area, for small business, and also for the walkability of that community over there.
Okay. I should add a footnote here is that at least at the project team level, we've always thought of 2 as not being highly locked in or site specific, that we need to learn more about that group of properties on the west side of Elward and kind of explore, if it were to be kept on the plan, sort of what's the best location. Okay, I'm looking around. Jean, let's go to you.
For the scenario planning, from my previous experiences with consultants doing plans that come through, if we have a lot of variables, it's difficult to comprehend what, if we change, I guess your question was, should we keep the commercial industrial in all 3 scenarios?
Correct.
My answer is yes, in the same proportion, so that the big variable, which is the number of housings and the density that we apply to it, is easier to analyze, because if we're only at the city paying for 3 scenarios and we have to make a decision with only 3 three options in play.
Mhm.
I'd like to have one number be stagnant so that we can understand the consequences of the housing.
Okay, okay,
I mean, if we could pay for or if it's in the plan to pay for a fourth that would a fourth and a fifth that would reduce it and increase it, I'm all for that. But I think from my experience with these types of programs, we bid for three scenarios, and that's
Mhm.
have available to us through the process. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
And I
It
think-
certainly makes our job more focused.
Right, and I
I'll-
think shrinking and or removing those would be a council decision based on the recommendation from the committee once we start looking at how many houses this means when we look at our three scenarios.
Okay, okay. Tamara?
Yeah, I was kind of curious when it comes to number two, what is like this, is it like an acre or how much space is there located there?
It's like 3 to 5 acres, so pretty
Okay.
small.
Okay.
Yeah,
I kind of like the idea of it not being there and being more residential. And I mean, it looks like three is not just on the other side of the high school. So I don't know. I kind of can see that as more continuing the flow of what we have kind of over, in the Hanley area and that whole area and continuing that flow and not having something right there. But that's just my opinion.
okay. All right. Doug, let's go with you.
Another thing to point out in relation to that is that just to the right on the map of 2, there's kind of that area along 99 that's kind of like jaggeded, that's undeveloped right now. That is all zoned commercial as well, or most of it is zoned commercial. So keep in mind that there will be commercial there as well, which is pretty close to number 2 now. So whether we leave 2 in or take it out, I think we heard that there were some questions about viability of it, but I'm okay leaving it in if the rest of the committee wants to. But I do think for the purposes of doing the scenario modeling, we should certainly lock 1, 3, and 4, and potentially 2, and make the rest of the plan variable, but leave those locked. I just think that's gonna be the easiest thing for us to look at various scenarios without moving that target around too. It's gonna create a lot of mud.
Yeah. Okay. Emily?
Just another comment in support of not having number 2, just the fact that the slope of the land there, the nature of that location, while it seems nice in that direct neighborhood there, I definitely think that the area down below and also the areas Doug just spoke about closer to 99 would be sufficient for supporting that need in those residential areas.
Okay. Rodney, another comment? Or
Yeah,
question?
just, it might be good to show that other commercial area. I didn't realize that there was a pink area just outside of the plan. So I don't know if that's possible to show. And hearing that, I still like the idea of 2, but if it was a little bit more north, a little bit more west, somewhere that you could have the kind of like the small restaurants along Roy Rogers, or the hair salons where people could walk to. So it might be that 2 moves around a little bit with the different plans you come up with, but I'm still for the somewhere in that area, a walkable commercial spot.
Okay. Emily, did you have another comment or saying? Okay. All right. Just to summarize on this discussion question, I think what I'm hearing is pretty strong support for holding 1, 3, and 4 in the scenarios, and enough interest in 2 that we should also include it. But it's got a question mark on it from the group, and it sounds like it's going to be one of those. What have we learned? Do we not go with it, or go with it, or modify it once we're whittling down from multiple scenarios to the preferred? Tim, let's get your comments and check back in.
Yeah, thank you. On number 1, we should definitely keep that. And I like the fact that the terrain and the stream corridors kind of create a natural buffer between employment land and housing land. In fact, you could even think about moving 2 up into that little square underneath 1 between the stream corridor and create trails and walkability to it. Doug brought up a good point on that land that's right along 99. That's all zoned commercial already. So there's a high likelihood that we'll have walkable land there. I'm also concerned about having, commercial or retail right next to the high school there with all the traffic that we're already experiencing with kids getting in and out of the school and on Elwert. I think it would just compound the problem there and creating some space between those activities, I think is a good one. And in terms of walkability for kids getting to the candy store, I'm sure we'll have something down in 3 to accommodate them from the high school there. So that would be my comments.
Okay. Jean?
Last comment, when we get the scenarios, could we also request that a topographical map be provided so that we can integrate our density in with our steep slopes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let me check back in. Did my summary sound acceptable to everybody? That we would be proceeding on the scenarios with 1, 2, 3, and 4, but we've got the commentary that we've received, particularly on 2. Some folks think that they may not be needed or feasible. Moving it to another location is worth exploring, and we need to be mindful of the nearby commercial on 99 to help us make those decisions. I'm seeing a couple thumbs up on my summary. Kennedy, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I did actually. So it's been a good conversation here. So I live at the bottom of Haiti Road there. So I deal with this every single day. I'm in favor of the high school, so are the neighbors that live on that road. But if you put that as commercial, that kind of mixed use employment there, then you're going to have to, like Tim said, you're going to have to figure out how you upgrade the road system out there. And as you've seen from the comments already, people are not excited about some of the traffic planning that has gone on with the high school. So that would be probably my thought is 2 would probably be my least likely option there.
Okay. Okay, I did
If
see
there's a strong desire for 2 from a walkability standpoint from the central part of this plan. I'm in favor of leaving it in, but in a different location, whether that be somewhere kind of north of where it is now, maybe northwest of where it is now, somewhere because I understand what some of the other members were saying about wanting to have something walkable from that big part on the northwest side of Chicken Creek, or even stuff just southeast of Chicken Creek. There's a lot of walkable commercial. So I think, to me, that's a better location, but I'm supportive of leaving it in if people want that.
Okay. Brian Fairbanks?
I'm in agreement with a number of the people that have commented about Elwert, and that's still one of my primary concerns with this. So I just wanted to throw out for me that I am opposed to 2. I am not opposed to it moving north, but I support 1, 3, and 4. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like my summary was fairly on track with all these good thoughts, and we will look at alternative places for 2. But you still, of course, will have more discussions in the future about whether it even shows up on the plan, on the final plan. Okay. All right, we'll move ahead. Just to hit the basics again, the range of housing types that will be on the scenarios will include single dwelling detached, single dwelling attached, and multi-dwelling, so that the full range that is discussed in your comprehensive plan shows up on Sherwood West. The amount and the degrees are what we'll explore, how many acres and how many units, but there will be the full range. So let's go to the next slide. So
Can I comment on that a little bit?
Yeah.
I think now this kind of touches on what we talked about before, but with HB 2001 really changes everything about this, because we can put out a map that says all this is single dwelling and detached, but if a developer comes in, they can build quadplexes on the whole thing. So I don't know how it almost like we have to rethink how we envision this, because it's what you might actually get is very, very different than what you put out there. So I don't have a proposal on how we look at it, but I think we have to think about it. The world has changed, and we can't put a map out based on what the world used to look like.
So we do have a couple of ideas for how we might approach that, and you summarized the challenge of it quite well. So if you could hold that thought a little bit further, I'll keep going here, and we'll see if we can get to this continuum of housing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let's see. So colors on the map, I think we talked about this before. They'll basically mirror the comprehensive plan, categories of low density residential, medium, and high. And next time we will bring that context, Gene, of what we're seeing for recent development patterns in Sherwood in these categories. Next slide, please. So housing mix is one of the assumptions that we have to establish. It helps us determine how many acres of each of those colors on the map will be needed, and do calculations about how many we might expect to see developed over time. Why is it important? It's already, I think we've made these points in various ways tonight. Looking at the detached, attached, and multi components is part of how Sherwood does its housing planning under state law. We've got the new state provisions for middle housing, and it's basically an index of potential housing cost and affordability. It doesn't tell you definitively how affordable housing will be, but at least it gives you a clue. So how do we go about looking at housing mix? Let's go to the next slide here. So we've already asked the question tonight, how much middle housing should be assumed? The first point, the first bullet on this slide has been stated well several times tonight. And the way we do it, our suggestion is that we look at each scenario as a progression of different levels of middle housing implementation, so that we can say, what if it was done according to patterns pretty similar to the comp plan, or maybe a little bit more than that on the middle housing end of things, or if just for study purposes, if the world kind of changes completely from what we see in the market today and a lot is done, let's use the scenarios to evaluate each of those. It doesn't answer the regulatory questions that we've sort of started raising in our discussion tonight, but at least it gives us a predictor of how many housing units of various types we might see on the ground. So let me keep going with this kind of set of assumptions here. Gene, a question on the previous one?
Yeah, do we have to meet Metro? So my understanding was Metro had a minimum requirement, and then we're also required to plan or have our utility development meet a certain density requirement. If I'm remembering correctly, that was, we have to be at 6 units or more per metro. I might be wrong with that, but that we had to plan our utilities for 20 units per acre. Is that still in play with all the House Bill 2001 ramifications? And then to the second question is, have any communities developed under the HB 2001? And how did that change the density? And that'll be an answer, I'm sure, later in this subject, but I think it's important to see if we have any examples of HB 2001 development that we can look at to see how that changed the density within the community.
Okay. Those are great questions. Let me answer the first two, and Erica, help me out on this so I get it right. The metro requirement, and it's actually a state law called the Metropolitan Housing Rule, establishes overall density requirements for cities. And Sherwood is part of the group of cities in the metropolitan area that must provide zoning that accommodates at least 6 units per acre. And it's that same law that where the 50% attached opportunity and the residual 50% detached is expressed. So that's the metro high level requirement.
Right. And as it now stands, you could zone the entire thing low density residential, and it allows for 100% attached.
Yes, if developers chose to do that.
Exactly.
Right. That particular scenario, so to speak, wouldn't meet the Metropolitan Housing Rule component that says 50% must be for, I'm sorry, it would meet that. It would not meet your own housing needs analysis that targets 25% to be multifamily.
Sure.
There's a tiering of these regulations.
So we could do 25%, whatever. Actually, that's not true, because all of those could also be multifamily. A quadplex is multifamily, isn't it? Or are we talking
five units or more?
5 or more? Okay.
5 and greater, yeah.
So
I'm kind of being absurd to prove a point.
Right. No, totally.
This is all kind of like, I don't know. It feels kind of, sorry, I'll just shut up.
It's an exercise in futility.
Erica, anything you would add to my trying to recite what the rules say?
You summed it up perfectly.
Okay. All right. So let's keep going. The approach here is going to be to create a series of sort of a progression of different implementation of middle housing. The things that are variables, and we kind of dialed into your thinking, Gene, actually, that it's the housing amounts and locations that are the key one to analyze. So our summary of what are variables include amount, type, and location of housing. The location of the neighborhood commercial node north of the high school. We'll explore different ones than we've already drawn. Something we haven't talked about tonight, but you might remember the maps where we did some estimates of the number of neighborhood parks. We placed them around connected to trails. People were kind of very excited about the map and supportive. What we haven't done so far is located a community park location. And Erica, could you just summarize what the community park is and size and the city's need for it?
Yeah, so the minimum size of a community park, I believe, is 20 acres, and we have identified it in our Parks Master Plan as having a community park. In Sherwood West, or on the other opposite side of 99, for the community. I know that, in the Parks Plan itself, it talks about, relocating the field house and having some other large, park amenities for the community, whether that's a field house or a cycle track. That'll come later down the road. But, right now, the acreage requirement, I believe, is 20 acres minimum.
The cycle track was not very well supported.
It wasn't, but I'm just throwing it out there, like what it could entail.
So related to this list, that the variable is where will it be? And that feels like a good discussion to have at our next meeting when we're looking at the maps and can kind of see some possibilities in context. Tamara?
Yeah, I was kind of curious, what is like the general acreage of like Stella or, gosh, I can't think tonight, Snyder. How big are those parks in comparison to the 20 acres that you're looking at for something that would be built out in Sherwood West?
Good question.
Erica?
That is a good question. I don't have those numbers. And I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but they are within the Parks Plan document. So after this meeting, I could definitely relay that information out to the committee.
Okay. Tim, something on this topic?
Yeah, and maybe this is a question for Jim Rose. The location of a future elementary school, I was just doing some simple math on the number of buildable acres for residential and the density that we've been throwing out. And I think Jim had mentioned in the earlier meetings, the students per household. It seems like we need more than just another elementary school once that's fully realized. Or am I adding up wrong?
Yeah, I think the math is something like 3,500 to 4,000 homes, and I'm just ballpark numbers. And Jim, if I remember your rule of thumb, it was one student per dwelling.
You're on mute, Jim.
All right, thought I got it unmuted. For multifamily dwellings, it's about 2 kids for every 10 homes. And then for single family dwellings, it's 1-to-1 basically. So for every home, we can expect a student within the K-12 system.
So if you have 3,500 homes, you could easily be talking 2,000 plus more students.
Yep.
That seems like more than one elementary school.
Likely it would. Roughly, we break out about half the students are K-5 and the other half are 6-12.
Yeah.
Do we envision needing a new middle school or no, only an elementary?
We currently have about capacity for 400 at the middle school, in addition to what we have today. So it's a numbers game. And as we get further and further out into Sherwood West, those numbers will get tighter.
So should we be thinking, instead of thinking about whether it's elementary or middle school or whatever, but is one new school location enough, or should we be contemplating 2 new schools?
I think we want to contemplate 2 with that many homes going in.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my gut.
I mean, it was a challenge to find the current property for the high school, and it will be challenging moving forward as well.
Is the current, I don't know what the trends are. I know obviously when we built the Ridges campus, it was, we had a combined middle elementary school. Is that something that would still be considered in the future if we needed both, or is that a trend that's now obsolete and not favored these days?
I don't know that it's not considered any longer. I think we'd have to look at what conditions we were in at the point we needed capacity, and whether that meant a single elementary or what I call a common wall school, like the Ridges was originally built. And what those decisions might be 8 to 10 to 20 years from now, that the district will have to weigh those decisions at that point.
Jim, one more question and then we'll go to Jean's comment. Should we use 10 acres per school as the planning guideline?
For an elementary, yes. For a middle school, I think it's closer to 25.
Okay.
I will jump onto my email. I have that answer here, and I'll get back to you in a moment with it.
Great.
I know it's hard to predict ahead of time, but isn't that part of what we're trying to do here is a 20-year plan? So when we're thinking of schools and how to incorporate that, it's a little hard to wait 10 years to see what the numbers look like then when we're trying to plan for 20 years now. So is there anything that we can do to plan a little more?
Yeah, my comment was more about whether or not we build one school that served middle school and elementary versus 2 separate buildings.
Right.
Yeah. Angie, was your question, how do we assure that there's land for schools in the future?
Well, just kind of tying into that, I mean, being here since we only had one of each school, seeing how well it appeared to work for a while to have the Ridges combined into one plot of land, the concern is how hard is it going to be to find one plot of land, let alone two? Like the growth is going to come. So it kind of makes sense. And I might be wrong. I don't have as much information as as the school board people do and everything else, but it seems like it would be easier to find one plot of land to be able to pre-plan to do a combo school than trying to find two separate plots of land when we're talking about pre-planning and the need for most likely needing both in 20 years from now.
Jim, let's stay dialed in on this. Let's go to get your comment, and then Jean, I do promise to get back to you.
I was just gonna say quickly, yeah, 10 acres for an elementary school is typical right now, and 25 to 30 for a middle school. So to the comment previously, I think from Angie, yeah, if we could plan out maybe 50 acres in 2 lots across somewhere in Sherwood West, that would be advantageous for the school district.
And does it help doing that also being able to combine some of the like playground and fields that are taken into consideration in that acreage? Like the Ridges were able to share some of those, Hopkins and SMS were able to share some of those. Would that be something that would help condense the amount of land that was needed if the schools were combined versus the amount of land that would be needed if the schools were separated?
They tend to operate separately. So even with when Hopkins and SMS were on the same property, SMS had their portion, Hopkins had its portion, and they didn't really blend much. And I think that was fairly true of the Ridges, Laurel and Edie prior to.
Okay, this is super helpful to our kind of lining up the assumptions and the pieces. Jean, what was your comment or question, please?
I just wanted to check in to see how many units you were actually estimating, because I had estimated looking at just taking the median of about 11 or 12 units per acre based on the numbers you were showing, which was 8, 11, and 24. It's like 4,100 units, both detached and multifamily. And I seemed like you were using fewer numbers when we started the conversation. So
I think I said 3,500 to 4,000.
okay.
And again, we're not quite there yet, but yeah, but somewhere up in that level is possible. And of course, we'll have those numbers for you to put side by side with maps when we meet in December.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think we got this discussed and improved. Next slide is just a reminder on some of the things that are remaining constant. Not listed here is the employment lands we talked about earlier, but Elward Edie option 1, protection of Chicken Creek, just the backdrop of intended transportation improvements and studies, the Metropolitan housing rule compliance, and the parks and trail concepts that we've been looking at to date. Tim, comment from you?
Yeah, and we've talked about this in several meetings, but I just want to make sure it probably should be a constant, and it's at the end of this, it's part of our concept plan, is that new alignment to offload traffic off Elward south of, or I guess it'd be west of, as you look at those maps, to the left-hand side, out Chapman in that area. That's really important as we move forward and work with the county and solidify that, because the county is going to look to us to say, what's your plan, even though it's a county road. And we have to show that we're planning for that, and that needs to be part of this concept plan. And I think in a previous meeting, Erica, you had mentioned that you guys were going to look at the topography and some high level alignments for that. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we're still having those conversations.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's in this.
Great.
So,
Doug?
yeah, sorry, I didn't put my hand up.
No worries.
Yeah, I agree with all these constants. I touched on the last one earlier when I spoke. I would say the fourth constant is moot. It's unnecessary. because no matter what you do, that will be met. So it's yeah. But I don't necessarily think we need to think about that in the way that we use it. I'm beating a dead horse now, but yeah, I like these.
Okay. Rodney, and then back to Tim.
Sorry, I just looked at the Parks Master Plan, and yeah, Snyder and Stella Olson are both 22 acres. So the plan's always been talked about another Snyder Park on the west side with 2 smaller parks of about 5 acres, which would be the size of like Woodhaven Park.
Just to jump on that, I think that we need to add that as a constant. I think the community park needs to be in here in every scenario.
Yeah, and it was the location of it that we were trying to characterize as a variable, but good clarification. Tim.
Yeah, just another concept. I'm just throwing this out there and feel free to shoot me down. And forgive me, I can't remember the Senate bill, but about, gosh, it's probably been almost 10 years ago. The state passed a law that took away the city's right to have voter annexations. So basically what that means is once land is in the UGB, a landowner can raise their hand up, or a developer that owns the land, and say, I want to come into the city, I want to be annexed. And we don't, it's a very prescriptive process right now. It's not a choice that we get to make anymore about whether that land comes into the city. There are some rules in there that give us some limited capability of creating annexation rules for how it comes in and how that operates. As part of this concept planning process, can we come out with a list of recommended annexation rules that would help us throttle those annexations instead of having it just totally be up to a developer that happens to own some land in the urban growth boundary?
Can I answer that? Because that just came through the Planning Commission, and Erica can provide more details, but part of the comprehensive plan update includes a revisit on annexation rules within the city, and our comprehensive plan addresses the criteria by which annexation would be allowed. Currently, the comprehensive plan is not, doesn't have any prescriptive measures that allow us to critically look at the land. And I think our comprehensive plan update, which I think is coming to hearing to you guys pretty soon, has, I think, 6 or 8 different items that have to be addressed before annexation is allowed. So if Erica could bail me out and tell me that it's in there, that'd be great.
Jean, I don't need to bail you out. You are 100% correct. So in our updated comprehensive plan, we do have a certain subset of criteria for annexations. And then as we move, into the future with, development code updates, we are looking at, additional like codifications that could be made for annexation criteria.
That is awesome. So I amend my comments to anything specific about Sherwood West that could help inform that would be great.
For sure.
But the discussion's timely because as you guys go through the hearing process, see something within the comprehensive plan, may be able to revisit that on kind of not on the fly, but as
Right.
You're digesting the comp plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gene.
Okay. Angie.
I was just wondering if the consideration of schools that we were just talking about should be included in this part here as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent point.
Great. Thank you. Rodney?
One of the plans I thought I saw, you have the large Laurel Ridge and the Ridges Elementary School now. Would that be the middle school for the west? and then you just put more community-based, smaller elementary schools. So the elementary schools are more walkable with 2 large middle schools that are rideable, and then you have the high school, instead of trying to get a large area so close to the ridges.
Jim, do you have any feedback on that?
Again, not knowing kind of what the district's needs will be in 8 to 10 years, I'm not sure I'd make that commitment today that would turn the ridges into a middle school. Some of it's really not built for middle school size children because it was built as an elementary school. So it's a good idea, and it's one I think the district would want to consider, but I wouldn't commit them to that at this point.
Okay, I think we got good direction on our lists of variables and constants. So let's go to the next slide. So here's a beginning kind of generalization of the scenarios, and there's a bit of it I need to clarify, but I think this helps us at least think through the conundrum of middle housing. So what we would suggest as the general descriptions is that there is a scenario A that basically follows the comprehensive plan. It's guided by the previous preliminary concept plan and what you're about to adopt in the update of the citywide comprehensive plan. It'll have embedded in it our employment areas, et cetera, and some component of middle housing. And in terms of the housing mix, what we would assume there would be the numbers that Erica showed initially. 50% detached, 25 single dwelling attached, and 25% multifamily. It is true that under your code, those numbers can go out the window. It is also true that the zoned opportunity is not necessarily what's going to happen as the built outcome. We had a discussion with the technical advisory committee today, and the representative from the home builders said that the development community is not jumping on the bandwagon for middle housing to convert all of their single family to multifamily, or to middle housing anytime soon. And I'm being pretty simplistic in my summary, but that was the basic message. And so what we're trying to do with the scenarios is do a forecast of what we think the outcomes might be. There, of course, are different things that the different ways that the number and type of housing can play out, but this is our estimates of what the outcomes could be. Scenario A would follow the parameters that I just summarized. Scenario B would turn a dial a little bit. It would say, what if there's a modest amount, number to be defined, but a modest amount of middle housing that developers actually do. So we take our number of single family lots that we're estimating in scenario A, and we say, what if X amount of those became either duplex or townhome? And we would try and pick that number to be what we think is a fairly, is plausible the right word? Maybe so. It could happen, and therefore we want to study it and be aware of it. So that would be scenario B. Scenario C, and apologies for the clunky wording here, what we were trying to do was continue that continuum of implementation of middle housing, just so that we could study if the world changes in 10 years and there is a lot of implementation of middle housing choices, or if there are some additional multifamily that are assumed in A and B, let's at least do a scenario where we can look at those numbers and think about those implications. That is not a desirable intended outcome type of scenario. It's a what if. So anyway, from what we expect to happen in the comp plan through some what ifs here, this is how we would we would organize the assumptions for housing in the scenarios, along with all the other constants and everything. So let me stop with that explanation and start with your comment, Tim, and then we'll get to others.
Just two things real quickly on the previous slide. Can you add a reference to our master parks plan? That's reviewed as part of that on that last bullet?
Yes.
Okay, that would be great. And then back to the slide you were just on. Let me make sure I understood this and unpack it a little bit. Scenario A would assume that 50% ratio between single family detached and multifamily, and then each of the other scenarios adds more and more multifamily.
Adds more and more middle.
Adds more and more middle. Yeah, it seems like we're starting high. That'd be my comment, and that with HB 2001 and all that, it feels like we're starting at a high number in terms of density, and then we're playing out scenarios of even higher and higher densities, but we're not playing out a scenario of a lower density outcome. To the comment that the HBA representative made in the TAC meeting.
So you'd be interested in a scenario A that is something less than your maximum comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's get a couple others that may not have spoken quite as much here. Angie, let's go to you.
So I just I'm wondering about a little clarification on the bigger picture here, I think. So we're having a lot of discussion on the density of housing. It's all speculative, of course, at this point. It's all what if scenarios in regards to the density of housing. What's kind of the domino effect here? So we're estimating and we're talking about what if scenarios for the density of housing. How does that really play into the bigger picture of what we're doing here? So in all of these scenarios, I guess my question really is, in each of these scenarios, if scenario A played out, if scenario B played out, if scenario C played out, how would each of those scenarios change the rest of what we're trying to do? Is it really, how much of an impact is the rest of what we're focusing on going to have based on these different scenarios? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the rest of our planning process for the concept plan.
Right. So we're talking about parks and schools and trails and all of that, which are all great things. We're talking about where we're going to put businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Is much of that going to drastically change regardless of what the housing density is? And if so, what is that correlation? So as we're spending all this time talking about the housing density, what does that mean for the rest of the plan as we're trying to talk through this? What are the differences to the rest of the plan going to end up being?
Great question. Thinking about our constants list, it doesn't change those kinds of things very much as we look at different possibilities and what ifs for housing. The employment side is going to remain relatively the same, The park, the trail network, same. The parks is a little bit of a tweaking and sort of a checking on acreage to make sure that our acreages of parks and numbers and locations are matched to how the neighborhoods are designed. But still, the fact that we're going to have parks distributed throughout the neighborhoods and the maps we've looked at to date, probably pretty similar.
And are neighborhoods going to have a required amount of green space within them as well that would be park-like, or is that not the case?
The development code requires open space with development.
Yeah. Okay.
And then there are the areas that are like Title 13, the regulatory natural resources also are regulated by Sherwood's code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what's our goal when we're looking at these different scenarios and talking about housing density? What's the goal of this particular part of the conversation?
To try and plan Sherwood West for the housing outcome that you want, and have learned about what if outcomes if more middle is built, but fundamentally to get the housing aligned with your values and your policies and your own vision for this concept plan. And then circling back to the beginning part of the question, to make sure that the other components are synchronized with it, the parks, the trails, all the rest of the pieces. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Any others that haven't spoken yet? Just want to try and check in with folks. Jean, let's go up to you.
I guess just to dovetail into what Angie was talking about, the exercise of this housing seems difficult at best because we have heard in so many of our community comments that we want to not have the density, and that increased density and maximum density is not what Sherwood is looking towards. But we're forced by the state and the Metropolitan housing rule to allow for certain types of housing. So with that being said, I would ask the question, first off, based on historical development, we're 8 units per acre. So we have a number there that actually gives us about how many houses. And I have this fear that we do a medium density. We're going to, like Councilor Rosner was saying, we start at the middle and we just add more density. Why not start it at the lowest possible density that state will allow? If we zoned as much land as we could low density residential, because that's what our community has feel for, because we have we are disadvantaged transportation wise because we're on the outskirts of Portland. We don't have buses, we don't have things. We need to have housing that meets the community. We are required by state law to allow a minimum of 25% multifamily. So we zone what we minimally must zone high density to allow for that 25% multifamily opportunity. The rest of it low density residential because of Senate Bill or House Bill 2001. Low density residential is both detached and attached. We meet all the other criteria. Why would we want to try and add high density or medium density sake of adding density? I have not heard anyone say that that is desirable within the community. I think we figure out that if we have 345 acres and we have to zone for what your number 3,500 or 4,000 units, if 1,000 of those units have to be available to be multifamily, we figure out that that many units is this much acreage and the rest of it goes low density. Is that a viable alternative so that we can preserve Sherwood as much as we can, given the state factors that we can't control?
Yeah, I mean, short answer, these are yours to create. So
Can I jump in on that really quick? From another perspective, I don't speak with the same people that our polls are polling, or that our surveys are going out to, but we also talk a lot about affordable housing. Well, how do we get affordable housing? We get affordable housing by creating higher density. Now, I've been here since the whole town was 3,500 people, so I've heard it all. I've seen it all. I get that, I was opposed to growth growing up, or young adult, because it changes things. Well, it's already changed. It's going to continue to change. But as a realtor, and I don't know if Brad sees the same things that I do, but I have client after client after client who either wants to move to Sherwood and can't because they can't afford it, who grew up in Sherwood and would like to stay in Sherwood and they can't because they can't afford it, who has a family who's going through a divorce and now they used to be able to afford a larger home and now the parents are having to afford 2 households and want to keep their kids in the same school district. and they can't because they can't afford it. So I know that on one hand, we hear that we want this low density, but on the other hand, we hear that we want affordable housing. And I see it firsthand time and time and time again. And the way to get that affordable housing is to make sure that we're implementing enough of this, of the middle housing type. So.
Right, but, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But low density does allow for middle housing type. In the low density, every single lot can have single family, duplexes, triplexes, quads. They're all allowed. It would be market driven at that point. That if
you're only allowing 8 to 10 houses per acre,
we can't limit that.
Okay, I thought I heard earlier that there was only allowed so many.
It's the disconnect between the zoning code as it currently exists and the impact that HB 2001 will actually have on it, right? So we can say this is zoned low density at 8 units per acre, but the reality of what gets built could be 15 units per acre.
It could be 32 units per acre.
Yeah,
They all become quads. The 8 units per acre no longer is a number that the city of Sherwood can hold a developer to if they choose to do middle housing. If they want to put in cottage cluster and put in 5 houses, 5 cottages on 1 unit, that would be the affordable housing alternative in a low density zoning.
So even if we say low density zoning of only 8 to 10, it doesn't ultimately, that can be in writing somewhere, but it can't be held to that. Okay,
Yeah.
now I see a little bit more what you're saying, Jean, about starting low and working.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure to speak up for some of the a lot of the families that I work with who have affordability as an issue here.
Right, and that's what that
and
middle
I think
housing
no matter how
is.
we zone, I think what Gene just said is absolutely true, right? The market is ultimately going to decide what gets built. I mean, Sherwood's a very desirable place to live, which means regardless of how we zone, you know, at least tomorrow, because we're seeing this in Brookman right now, right? What's everyone building? They're building single family houses because they can sell single family houses, you know, and make more money than they can doing whatever else. And the market's deciding that. And I'm not trying to sound callous about that because I don't know that we can make something that's highly desirable also highly affordable. Like those two things are in direct competition with each other. That's just economics. I mean, I'd like to live in a house up on the hill, but I can't afford it either. Again, I'm not trying to be dismissive of it, but it's
Right, but
it's social engineering, and there's only so far you can do with that, right?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I see it every day. Is there a way to create smaller zones that are required to have? Don't we have smaller zones that are required to have higher density? Can't we separate those zones out and make a certain number of acres that are required to have higher density?
I mean, 25% of, we have to do 25% multifamily right there off the top.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my suggestion, that 25% that we have by state law, 25% is multifamily, which is that zoning for apartments or
Condos maybe, or,
Right.
okay. Okay,
It's
I think all the pieces are starting to fall into place now. Thank you.
Gene, in your summary of that, 25% would be multifamily and 75% would be single family detached. Right?
correct. And that it's
But we don't zone single family detached.
right. And that's what I'm saying. We don't zone that. We zone a density of how many units per acre.
Which also is now meaningless. So.
Which is now meaningless with House Bill 2001. So why do we want to at first start cutting up the pieces to 11 units and then making it 20 to 40 units per acre when that's it seems unsustainable? Because
Right.
if we even go to 20 units per acre, that's where I was going to. At 20 units per acre, that's 6,900 households on the 345 acres that we're starting with. At 6,900 units, that blows out I mean, do we have enough parks to cover it? Do we have enough schools to cover it? So all the
No.
numbers get
I
I mean,
No,
that's
I
doubling
understand.
the population of Sherwood, probably more.
Yeah.
than
And for context for everyone, we have 6,700 households in Sherwood today.
right.
Just
So
to give you the context on that.
So if we start with middle density and go up from there, we're starting at 20 units per acre, or 11 or whatever the number was. We're
Right. If the
It's
market builds,
unfathomable.
if the market builds it. If the market doesn't build it, then
Right,
you're starting at the low.
Right, but that's where, do you assume, what do you assume is going to happen, right? That's why,
Right.
you know, I had my hand up, so I have
No,
something
this
to
is-
say, but
this
I
is
wanna make
exactly the
Jean got
trade-off
her
here.
point finished first, before
Yeah,
I
I was
go
just-
on mine.
I was gonna say, just look a half mile to the north. What happened there?
Yeah, and we've heard routinely, I mean, over and over and over again, nobody wants that. But that's what I fear could happen if we just zone this like the way we've always zoned everything. We're going to end up with that, or worse than that potentially, because now we're talking 10 or 15 years from now.
And the references to River Terrace.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So going back to this, I don't think we should base anything on the 2016 concept plan, because the world has changed. So I'm kind of with Gene. I'd rather scenario A be like, let's just put everything at the lowest possible and know that some amount
Right.
of that is going to be built up beyond it. And you know, if you think low, you know, you know, low is the new middle and middle is the new high, right? I mean, everything's just going to upzone to some degree. It's just a matter of how much. We don't know, right?
Yep.
And that's where I guess I keep coming back to this, and I'm sorry, but I almost feel like all of these scenarios, let's say we run all three of these, they're all still based on the old world. The results of them are going to be potentially astronomically different than what actually happens. So how valuable are they to us? Like it feels like we're using the old tools in our toolbox because we don't have new tools available to actually tackle the problem in the way that we need to tackle it. And so I think we need to throw out the tools and start getting creative. Like how like Tim threw out a suggestion to me earlier. Can we look at special zoning types that say you can build cottage clusters in this zone, to support middle, or can we draw, and I talked about this before, how do we incentivize the middle housing development that the people in Sherwood want to happen, and not the middle housing that people don't want to see, or whatever, right? And I just think we have to be creative. Is there incentives we can do to say, oh, you know what, if you want to build a concept plan cottage cluster over here, let's help you with that. Let's partner with a developer. Let's figure out how to go after that. Oh, we want to build this smaller scale, single family detached because, people who can't afford 2,500, 3,000 square foot houses with 7,000 square foot lots can't afford that, but they want to live in Sherwood. Can we build a concept plan of, of 1,500 square foot houses, of starter homes that people are maybe more affordable for? Like, those are things that people want to see in Sherwood. And I'm really, really fearful if we just use the old tools, we're not going to get that. We're going to get River Terrace. And I think we have to look at new tools. We have to be creative. And I know Tim's got some other ideas too, but I don't know. It just feels like all of these scenarios are going to give us garbage in, garbage out, because they're based on a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Are there particular tools that you would suggest or outcomes that you can articulate so that the team can try and work on this and bring back a helpful discussion?
Surveys we've done, right, about like the different types of housing that people want to see, right? And we've done multiple surveys on this, right? We did it in the scope of this, and we also did it in our housing design standards, right? And we've done it in some other surveys around the middle housing. And what we're seeing consistently and over again is people like the idea of cottage clusters. People like the idea of smaller single family detached. People like townhomes to a degree. People like mixed use retail, house work live, right? People don't really like quadplexes and triplexes and some of the other things. So how do we drive outcomes toward the things that people in Sherwood want that also meet the affordability and some of the other things that people want, and drive developers away from the outcomes that people in Sherwood aren't looking for? I don't know.
As a quick example, I hate to jump in, but can we do exclusive single family detached zoning? HB 2001 says we can't do. I mean, are there other options out there, to help us encourage the right development?
Right. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Can we do a cottage cluster zone? Can we do a townhouse zone? Can we do a courtyard apartment zone? Right. So it's like, we know we can't do single family zone, but what about, can we do multifamily zone, but that is geared towards specific types of multifamily that people are interested in?
Actually, the answer is yes. I'm pretty sure it's yes, that if you created a zone that had specific middle housing types in it, but did not include single family detached, then you don't have to allow all the plexes.
So I think that's the kind of thing we need to be creative about, right? And that's what you all can help us be more creative about. But I think, I think we need to look at this. We need to flip the world on its head, because that's what's happened to us.
Can I take you back to one of the comments that we've thought through together here? Is affordability an intended outcome?
Absolutely. I think that, go ahead, Doug.
I was just going to say yes, but affordability is also relative. Like Sherwood is never going to be affordable like certain parts of the other parts of the metro area, because it's highly desirable and those things are in conflict. So relative affordability, absolutely. We're not going to be able to meet every single income range in the metro area. It's not realistic.
Well, and that varies a little bit. If you look at the Glen Eagle condos, you can still get a Glen Eagle condo for, an affordable price. It just depends on as much on the housing type as it does the location.
Well, and age too, right? Older housing stock is going to become more affordable. Newer housing stock generally isn't as affordable.
Right.
We keep hearing that. I haven't been seeing it for a few years,
Really?
but you would think that.
But that's the theory that's held previously, right?
And the other thing is, we've been building, since the mid-90s, we've been on this building boom, and so many of those homes are only the bigger ones. The amount of larger homes that we have is starting to outweigh, if it doesn't already, those smaller, more affordable homes. So if we don't build more of those, then it's going to be skewed. We're going to be right back to only people being able to live here who can afford the older homes. So
yeah. Okay. So it is an intended outcome, but in the Sherwood context, kind of calibrated to Sherwood.
Right.
Okay. We're inching our way there. This is super helpful. Let me check in on time. We are past 7:30. If everybody's okay, maybe we try and budget closure on this, more brainstorming of ideas for the team to come back with for about 10 minutes. Is that okay? We'll try that. Let's see if we can wrap in that time frame.
Joe, I think Rodney's had his hand up for quite a while.
Thank you. Rodney, go ahead.
It's just a quick question for a thought. Can you tie middle housing to the size of park? So if somebody wants to build a bunch of middle housing, they have to donate they'd have to donate some of that land to a park to facilitate those middle housing. I don't know if that's something that Sherwood could do.
No,
you can't.
You can't require middle housing to do anything more than a single family detached housing development would do.
That was in HB 2001 as well.
Right, that creates a disparity.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there enough cities opposing 2001 that it will be in place when we do this?
No one's opposing us.
There's no
last update from staff was there was no opposition. Is that still true?
It's a state law that cities can't just decide to oppose it.
We testified against it. I myself went down to Salem and testified against it when they were debating it in Salem, but to no avail.
Okay, Jean.
So I would go back to Councillor Scott's statement that we need to look for more tools in the toolbox. I think we are setting ourselves up for failure and for unintended consequences if we don't be creative with our zoning. To Angie's point, we need to find alternative housing types. But if we just use our existing zoning and say we would envision a more affordable house here, we can't tell developers how to do that with the tools that we have in place right now.
Mhm, mhm.
It's a miss. So
Let me ask a tough question. Do the tools need to include tools that limit middle housing?
I mean, I don't know that that's the way I would put it. I
No.
think
Okay.
I think that I like the idea, if this is possible, I like the idea of having very specific middle housing zone types.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
because I think it's more about, to me, it's more about encouraging middle housing that the people of Sherwood are interested in over middle housing that they aren't.
Yep.
And it's also, and then I think also if there's some way that we can, I don't know how to do this, but if there's some way that we can encourage some, you know, right now, if you look at over the last 20 years in Sherwood, right, every single family house that's built is 2,000 to 2,500 square foot on a 5,000 to 7,000 square foot lot. Like they're, you know, and Angie probably knows this way more better than I do, but that's my gut. How do we encourage more diversity, even in the single family housing stock, right? You know, so that, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but it would be nice if, yeah, sure, we still going to need 2,500 square foot single family houses, but can we get more 1,500s too? Can we get, you know, how do we encourage that? I don't know if we can, but to me, in the middle housing, it's more about encouraging the types that people want, not necessarily limiting the amount.
I don't
Got
know
you.
if there's much
Thank
about
you.
on the city side. Is there a way to incentivize builders to be able to do the smaller homes or the cottage clusters or land that manufactured homes can be put on where they own their own land? So there's more accountability towards manufactured home, you know, the manufactured homes on land blend in fairly well to stick-built homes compared to the ones in parks, but they're more affordable. They don't appreciate and value quite as much. They still appreciate, but is there a way to incentivize builders at all, developers at all, to look into some of these other options from the city standpoint?
Tough subject.
Yeah, I can take this, Joe. I think it is a tough subject, but you know, over the next couple of years, I think that's definitely going to be a subject that the city is going to have to touch on. We're going to have to develop a housing production, you know, strategy according to state law by 2027, and that housing production strategy is going to have to touch on some of those issues. Angie, how do we, encourage different types of housing in Sherwood?
Is that
those policies or actions that the city is going to take?
Is that something that would be worth considering adding to that last page, the constants that we were looking at, where we were going to add the schools?
It's kind of a study topic, Angie. Historically, zoning incentives have not been very effective in changing what people build. That doesn't mean you don't pursue how to get them to work and apply new ideas. That would be my take on it. Jean, let's take your comment and let me see if I can summarize next steps.
One thing I don't want to lose focus on is the fact that the community wants to ensure that we keep green spaces and open spaces. And as we use our development tools and these scenario frameworks, ensuring that all different types of development, I don't know if we can add to the code. I know what the code says now, that we can ask for single family detached. Is that sufficient as we move into the Sherwood West area? Should developers dedicate 7% or 10% or some other number to ensure that there is adequate open space in each community as it's being developed.
Mhm.
In addition to that, I think what so much about River Terrace that people are opposed to is that the areas that were left for dedicated green space are wholly unusable. It's all riparian areas that had to be left as green space. And so they left all up, they used that in their calculations for lots versus actually creating usable green spaces. And I think that's what the community wants to see.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, parks that are just central features in neighborhoods and easily accessed by everybody. And
Yeah, I mean, you look at Villa Bois, I think, as an example of something where it was done much more successfully.
right, yeah.
I agree with the Villa Ball comment. And for some reason, dog parks just popped into my head too, is another one that are very, people really like to see, fenced in dog parks. I know we have one, but that's something that is pretty desirable as well.
Pretty sure that's in the Parks Master Plan for West Side Park.
Yep.
Okay, so here's Tim, I'm sorry, you have one more comment?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the density versus parks land comment. Is it possible to tie the amount of parks land or open space land to the number of housing units as opposed to the housing type and skirt the whole challenge with the HB 2001 where you can't have, you got to be equal in terms of how different types of housing are incentivized?
Mhm. So the more units, the more parkland
Yeah,
would be
the theory being the more people there are, the more open space you need.
yeah. I think the answer is yes, from a public policy and implementation perspective. The footnote is, in terms of developer exactions, it gets a little more tricky. You just have to treat everybody the same.
Right.
But I think it's generally a yes answer. Okay.
What about the mixed use option being, I see it at the very, where did I see it? I think option number 1 on scenario C. It's not the most ideal, but I have clients all the time who end up in condos or even the Forest Creek condos over there by the YMCA that there's no direct outdoor space because that's what they can afford and they want to be here. So they'll compromise for that type of housing for affordability and location. So if we're looking at how else do we incorporate affordable housing into Sherwood that would encourage developers to build that type of housing, expanding on the mixed use zoning, I don't know what that is, but expanding on trying to get more mixed use being built. Like we have a couple of the buildings in Old Town are mixed use. That might be one way to encourage some sort of affordable housing, maybe.
I think that also dovetails with potentially dovetails with the commercial area too we were talking about before, right? And so instead of that being a strip mall, if it's a mixed use development, then you get the housing and that kind of walk up commercial all in one.
Yep.
Right, like I could see that being in what was it, the shadowed area number 2 a few slides back. What if that whole shadowed area was mixed use?
Okay. All right. Tim, did you have another comment?
No, I just forgot to put my hand down. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So the team needs to go back and work on this, but here's my summary of what you've said we should include in the next body of information. Specific to middle housing, new tools that get the middle housing that Sherwood wants. So don't just assume or work with the old zoning construct and play with the numbers about how many might be built, but rather think about the actual implementation. And you're included in that. You're very interested in the focused middle housing zones, ones that would require townhomes or just cottage clusters, but not the full range of middle housing. That's 2 items that I heard. I'm going to go back to Jean's initial suggestion, and that I saw some head nods that at least for scenario A, look at what would be the minimum amount of residential development that's allowed by state law. You're interested in seeing that scenario. And that's probably going to be something like, 80% of your comp plan or some percentage of your comp plan. Affordability is a goal, but it's in the Sherwood context. You're interested in mixed use in the employment areas, maybe number 2 specifically. Now I'm going to get to some sort of contextual comments. Green spaces are constant and need to be part of this thinking. And maybe there is a dwelling units to parks ratio that is part of the construction of the scenarios. And that would be my list of kind of key points. We need to work with those and see if we can mold them into scenarios that would be going the direction that you want them to.
I just want to confirm that adding schools to the constants made it on there.
Yeah, all the constants lists. So we've got those notes. Yes, the changes we made to all the constants and the variables are the backdrop to this. Did I get that about right? Or would anybody have like a comment, a refinement, an additional point that I may not have summarized?
And maybe you already said this, but with the scenarios where we're talking about these creative ideas to encourage the type of middle housing that the community wants, what's the high level action plan? What are the things we would have to do to make that happen?
So just for clarification, the scenarios that you're going to bring back, are you bringing back maps that are color coded with various yellow, orange, and red zones, or are you bringing what's the deliverable on the scenarios?
It's up to you. Frankly, if you want to have another conversation about the tools, the outcomes, and sort of the pros and cons of different approaches. Have we gotten enough creative on the get creative scale? We could organize the next meeting to do just that, and then prepare maps. So really the process is yours to
I don't want to blow our map budget on the old tools, right? Where we just plug in low, medium, high. That's a waste to me. I want to see maps that invoke all the creative new tools that we can come up with and be innovative about, and then go build maps. So if that means you guys need to go away and think about, the creative ways we've thrown out, as well as some new ones that maybe we haven't think of, and then you come back and say, what do you think about this? And then we say, okay, now go build us maps. Great. I don't want to see maps. I don't want to waste any time on maps that have low, medium, high. No, not interested.
Yeah. Okay. Erica, this is the part where you get to kick me under the table. You're the city's project manager here. From your perspective, thoughts on moving ahead like that we would come back with a scenario definition discussion and discussion of creative tools.
Before she answers, and I know Angie has a comment, what I hear from Councilor Scott is that if it's throwing out our code and bringing in a new code, and that new code looks like that develops a result that has, many people have said something similar to Villa Block, those tools, if that's what we need to do, is have a master plan community that has these scenarios in place that still meet House Bill 2001 and those criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's, I mean, that's, end of the discussion, and the rest of the committee needs to weigh in on it. But I agree with Counselor Scott that we don't want a map that just says if we put a little bit more orange here or red here, this is how many houses we're going to get. We have that already with our existing plan. What we need is a plan that's going to use new tools that we don't have at all. So Angie, go ahead.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of my last thoughts too, is we brought up Villebois earlier as what appears to be a more successful way of meeting all the housing needs compared to River Terrace, which is funny because when it first went in, I was still so opposed to that type of building. I was shocked by it, but now, so many years later, I've definitely seen the success of it. And it does have everything from the mixed use to the apartments, to the condos, to the townhomes, to the 3,000 square foot homes on 5,000 square foot lots. It has the swimming pools. I mean, it really does incorporate everything that we're talking about wanting. So how did Wilsonville get that? And if that's something that the majority of people agree fits what we're talking about and all these points that we're trying to bring to Sherwood, how do we attract that?
Right.
And can we codify it?
So you've identified kind of one of the key things that concept plans can aspire to, because Villebois is a master plan community in the sense of a single master developer who designed all 300 acres plus at one time, hired the best of architecture and urban design to do it, and then created a specialty code. There's a whole section in the Wilsonville Code that implements it, that has been updated over the years. So how do you replicate the benefits of that and the pretty beautiful built form in an area that will be developed not by a single master developer, but likely multiple projects on multiple properties? Wilsonville's Frog Pond project has learned some things about how to do that. So we'll try and weave that thinking into what we bring back. But I do want to kind of highlight the difference.
Yeah.
What we create has to be implementable in increments, not in a single master developer.
Well, I'd be curious, sorry, Tamara, I just want to touch on what he said. I'd be curious to see how Frog Pond is handling HB 2001, because Villebois didn't have to.
Right.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. They need about a year to give you the answer to that. But we can show you how it's being done in the part of Frog Pond that's being developed now. Okay. Erica, we went by the kick me under the table part. Do you have staff input on next steps?
Yeah, I think for our next steps, we need to come back and just have an additional conversation, about our scenario planning from this conversation, and we can come back to the committee with tools, that we are looking at that kind of that implements what we've heard tonight, and from staff and probably you as the committee, we want to get to a plan that really embodies the values of the Sherwood community.
Okay. Tim, any closing thoughts from you on this?
That's exactly what I had. I just want to say this has been an awesome conversation, and I really appreciate everyone weighing in and getting to this point. We have plenty of time. The next mid-cycle ask is 3 years out. So we can take some extra meetings and make sure we get this right as we move forward, given this new environment we're dealing with HB 2001. So this is, in my mind, this has been a great meeting.
And this is the most critical part of the plan. So I'm not to speak for everyone else, but I'll spend as many meetings on this as we need to get it right.
Yeah. And I think I can speak for the team to say, it doesn't hurt our feelings if you say, oh, wait a minute, we want to try something else, emphasize this instead of that. That's exactly what we're all about in these discussions. So we appreciate the guidance.
So that being a timetable question, since Billabong was something we liked, but it was built before HB 2001, Frog Pond is now under HB 2001, and your statement was we're about a year out from seeing implementation. We are a few months into a project that's going to expire on a time frame that I now have forgotten from the first slide that we had tonight.
Summer, July of next year.
July of next year. What if we put a pin in the final adoption for that 1 year? I'm not saying we answer it tonight, but implementation and acceptance of this plan. And Tim, thank you for telling us that mid-cycle is 3 years out. My fear is we adopt it and then regret it because we didn't see what happened at Frog Pond. And either we liked it and we didn't do it, or we don't like it and we followed what they did. And I fear that we are racing to a finish line before we even know what our final destination is, because we don't have enough information and enough groundwork laid to be doing the best work possible.
I think that's an excellent point, Gene. And I would actually divide it into two categories. I think we might find there's things we need to do now, right? As we learn more about HB 2001 to get ahead of things. And then to your point, which is spot on, make sure we're incorporating the learnings from the communities around us as they go through the process.
Okay. Good
And
point.
for what it's worth, Frog Pond, they are already selling.
Right.
I mean, they're under construction. They're selling. People can go in and buy one of those homes now, so they're not that far out.
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated story that it's Frog Pond, just to make a long story short, is 500 acres. 180 of it is in the UGB and about half of it already annexed. That's the part you're seeing developing now and homes being sold. And the HB 2001 rules that apply in that situation are different than those that will apply in the remaining acreage that hasn't been annexed yet. And it's the remaining part that is what I was describing as, a year until we have pretty well developed stuff to learn from there. Although,
but they must have a concept plan or something that's.
Yeah. Yep, there is a concept plan. And so I think we start there. I think we fold that into our December discussion of what can we learn from Villebois, what can we learn from Frog Pond to date, and how might that inform our scenario definition?
And what is required by state? I mean, we have to keep that.
Okay.
What would Villebois been allowed under the rules that are in place now?
I mean,
Yes.
some of the Villebois already follows those rules with the density.
It does.
It does.
Yeah, it's about 10, 11 units per acre on average. And it's got quite a diversity of middle housing.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have been able to mandate all these lots that are single family to be single family. Somebody, the developer could have just said, nope, I'm going to build quadplexes.
Could have.
And even that varies because a lot of the single family lots in Villebois are 2,500 to 3,500 square feet. So developers aren't putting many multiplexes on 2,500, 3,000 square feet lots.
That's true.
And that's a lot of Villebois is on those super small lots, kind of like we have over here behind Target.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I'll be interested in whether that's a strategy that you want to try and apply.
Also, for what it's worth, if we're
West.
talking about Frog Pond, they're currently starting at 563,950. So that doesn't really fit our housing model.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's just the reality of the market, right? I think we can say we want affordable, but I mean, what kind of single family detached new construction is going to come in much less than that in Sherwood, right?
Right, but we're talking not only about detached also for that middle housing, so that
Right.
helps.
Just so everybody's been really good about staying extra. I think we made a lot of progress. Thank you. And my suggestion would be we cut it off for tonight, and we will see you in December. Okay.
Thank you.
With that,
Thanks.
we're done. Thank you very much.